could say it needs a lot of attention, right? We want a nice reverb, a nice delay, and everything is very audible. It's not washed up and layered by other sounds. So we have to put a lot of effort in this to make it sound cool. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm gonna make an Afterlife track with you. Tale of Us has one of the biggest labels in melodic techno, and I want to show you today how the artists from the label create the very own signature sound of Afterlife, how the drums work, how the melodics work, and in the end we're also having a look at a possible arrangement for a drop. You can get the session and all the Serum presets are used down below in the description. There's a link, just follow there. You can download everything for free, and I would say let's just start. The first element I want to have a look at is the kick and bass. So obviously that's one of the most important parts of a track if you make dance music. And in this example we have a typical 808 kick here, and there's only just a little bit drum bass to give it more drive and to get out the transient a little better. And underneath there's a bass line, and the bass line is split into two layers. There's a sub layer which is really there only for the very low frequencies and to give enough power for the club. We can have a listen here real quick. And on top of that there's a 16th note bass line running, and the two complement each other very well. The reason we want to split this is that we want to process the sub bass individually. So you can see there's a different sidechain setting. We also have an auto filter here, decapitator to give it a little more harmonics. And then on the top layer we can see that we cut the bass and also have some different sidechain settings. So both together sounds like this. Together with the kick drum. And since this is not totally mixed yet, there's not too much happening on the group here, just some saturation, a little bit to glue it all together and get everything a little louder and tighter. The bassline pattern is really obvious, essentially just the 16th notes playing here. We leave the kick drum away. We could have also put it like this, but the sidechain drops it down either way. And yeah, there's a lot of possible ways to make bassline patterns, but this one is the most common one, and we hear it in a lot of tracks, like for example the very big track Running by Anima. And now let's have a look at the percussions on top. So we have a very short and snappy offbeat hi-hat, and that's very typical. The offbeat hi-hat shouldn't be too strong, shouldn't be too long, so the tail should be kind of soft here. Let's just have a listen real quick. And on top of that we have rights, and those are two different rights just panned to the side, so one left and one right, and they sound like this. So that already gives a nice stereo feeling, and you can also notice that they are very quiet in comparison to the rest. So they're really only there to give a little more energy on certain points of the track, and they're not too much in the front like maybe in techno, for example. One really important element that I notice in a lot of Afterlife tracks is this kind of cymbal percussion. So what I used here is the just typical 808 cymbal, and I'm gonna deactivate the LFO here first. The pattern looks like this, so it's just some kind of groovy pattern. And what's happening now with the LFO is that it randomly changes the decay of the sound, which eventually sounds like this. That's very important to give a human feel to the whole beat. If we have a listen to all this in combination. And also I used the new Ableton 11 feature, which is this velocity range here. So every note has a different velocity range. You can see this here, that's -52. So the notes are always going to be randomized in between this velocity range, which makes it feel even more human. Later in the track, maybe we want to kill the LFO here and use the decay ourselves. So what we hear a lot is that this is used for risers or just a little rise to open the decay until the point where the kick comes back. But that's just an idea to work in the arrangement, and you can do it in very different ways. The next element is a percussion. I noticed a lot of different interesting percussions, and this one is actually made with Serum. The sound looks like this, so it's basically just a saw wave being modulated by another saw wave through frequency modulation. It's very, very short, you can see that here. The LFO controls the decay a little bit, so this is also changed over time. And there's a bandpass filter. Hard to imagine what it sounds like. I'm going to show you. And obviously there's a lot of ways we can work with those percussions, put them in different echoes, open up the decays, open up the filters. So the sound is really about having minimalistic drums, but making them very interesting over time through different modulations. And that's it already. In a lot of tracks there's also a typical clap on the second hit, but for this one I decided to leave it away, as they do it in a lot of tracks. It gives it a little more techno feeling and not too much of the tech housey or housey feeling, but that really depends on the kind of style you want to go in with that Afterlife sound. Next, we want to have a look at all the melodic elements, and obviously we're doing melodic techno here, so those are pretty important. The first one here is a lead sound. It's copying from Serum, and it's actually not too complicated. It's really just two detuned saw waves, and the melody is also quite simple. It's really important to have those nice repeating melodies in the sound, which give it a lot of depth and emotion. So let's have a listen here. So that's pretty much the theme I want to go with in that track. And there's a lot of atmosphere behind that. So first we have this background ARP, which is essentially a very complicated looking chain, but it's not that hard actually to understand. So again, there's another really simple sound utilizing the sync here. You can check all of this out in the session for sure. And then there's two chains in the audio effect rack. One is dry and one is a long echo with another echo on top. So the echo gets tiny little delays on top of it, which sounds very nice. And all of this is going through a reverb. And we're gonna have a listen here real quick. So that's what the pattern looks like. There's only those two notes, which are kind of similar to the ones we're playing here. And the echo is doing the rest with the reverb. And it's really important, it's only in the background if we listen to the two sounds together. You can really hear that they just complement each other, and it's almost like a running atmosphere, but it's more interesting because the ear notices that there are different notes being played, so it's like a little arpeggio but in the background. And then maybe even more important, there's the chord basics. So the chords I wrote here are very simple, and for this one I've used Diva. If you don't own Diva, it's not too bad because there's also a freeze version over here. And essentially the sound I'm going for is some kind of Jupiter sound. And the idea was to have the chords always playing underneath everything. So it sounds like this. And then they can open up in the break to give this really, really deep and emotional feeling. And I want to show you all of this together with the beat. So far so good, but what's the most important thing that these tracks mostly all have in common? It's the difference between melodic and depth and the feeling of being drowned into like a lot of atmosphere, and then being resetted into a mode where it actually feels a little like hard or rough. So in almost every track there's a sound which resets the mood and gets you into this really techno tunnel vision feeling, only the kick running and this one sound. And for this one I tried to make a sound with Serum again, and it sounds like this. And I created a lot of different variations for this, for example this one. So the idea is essentially to have this very melodic break, which then gets lifted up heavily through a lot of FX and then runs into this gap. So the gap is very, very long and empty, and the people really beg for the drop. And then what we talked before already, it's resetting to this really hard techno vibe, and the sound here, the lead strong track, is the one we want to use for this. So back here I have a bunch of FX. You're gonna hear them later in the arrangement, and also this chord FX, which I really like. And it was inspired by a lot of sounds they use, which sound like they have like a little pitch shift going, and they're much in the background. So try to rebuild this, and it sounds like this. Now we're in the arrangement view, and I'm gonna show you how I built a little break and drop for this sound. And as I said, you can get the template as well in the description. So it's very nice for you to try to analyze the arrangement. But first of all, I'm gonna explain a little to you what I tried to do here. And let's just have a listen first, and then we can see what happened here in detail. So the idea of the arrangement is essentially that we have different parts. The first part here comes right after the end of the beat, and it's kind of a part to get the people very like dreamy and stop dancing for a moment and really get lost in the soundscape. And you could even layer more pads here, try to add some FX. There's no real limits. It just shouldn't be too much so that people can focus on one particular thing, which in this case is the chords here. You can see that the way they open up and get down again is really like pleasing for the ear, you know? Then we enter the second phase of the break, and this is just opened up by those FX here. And it's the part where the lead melody comes back in, and after introducing it for a short period of time, we then already start to build up the power over the other FX here. And then there's a snare roll layer to this. it actually sounds pretty weak, but that's totally fine because we have a lot of melodic elements going around that, and it should actually only just support this just a little and push the things a little higher. And the idea is to get to a very, very climax point here. Everything is opened up. If we have a look at the automations of the lead here, we can see that the cutoff is opening over time. We're running into this big reverb. The envelope on the cutoff is also being raised. We have the release going up, so the notes get longer and longer and everything feels washed up at a point, which is also supported by the delay, which is ping pong. And we're going to come back to the delay again a little later because it's also really important. And then, as I said before, there's this little gap and nothing happens in there. It's only the reverb of, for example, the clap or the lead sounds here. Let's just have a quick listen so you know what I'm talking about. And you're really like, okay, what's happening now? When is something coming? You could actually also add like a little percussion here. So in the beginning, I had the idea to put this here, but I liked it a little more. I thought it had a little more impact when it really hits without anything that introduces the drop, but that would sound like this. I like the other version a little more, but yeah, as I said again, it's really up to you and it offers a lot of space for creative ideas. You could also utilize the lead again, put it in here just for some little step ideas, or maybe even take this one and start a tiny gap like this. But this is the sound that I really want to talk about a little longer now, because as I said before, the sound is necessary to reset the mind of the listener and go back into this kind of tunnel vision techno mode. So in the break, we really get lost into atmosphere and dreaming and everything is rised up and we push our hands up as dancers or whatever. And then after this gap, you really get the feeling of, okay, now I'm just back to dancing. And it's really important that these sounds have a kind of a even industrialized, textured feeling. So this is why I added a lot of decapitator here, and the noise is really loud. It goes through the bend algorithm, which takes away the lower frequencies in this case. So, you know, the waveform gets bent like this. Just to explain it to you real quick, there would also be the other way, which bends it a little more into a sine wave, so it takes away the harmonics. This one is, it feels a little more like a pulse wave modulation, which takes the low end of the signal, so to say. And the delay is really important here as well. So we have a ping pong delay on send D, and it's essentially just here. It looks like this is really not too complicated, but the effect it has is really important. It really gives a lot of atmosphere to the sound. Let's have a listen here real quick again. You know, it's like an ear candy going back and forth from the left to right. And it's so audible and so much up front because there's only the kick and bass line running and nothing else. Only the kick and this lead sound. And that's why the delay is really much important. So you always have to think about what's the main character in this situation. So in the break, the main character is obviously this lead, the purple one. But in this part of the song, the second lead, the lead strong as I call it here, is the main character. And this one needs a lot of attention in this. You could say it needs a lot of attention, right? We want a nice reverb, a nice delay, and everything is very audible. It's not washed up and layered by other sounds. So we have to put a lot of effort in this to make it sound cool. And one of the sound design tricks that is used here is actually the length of the notes, because maybe you already wondered why it sounds so short at some points and then long again. That's because we kind of lowered the sustain here and there's no release at all. So there's pretty much the length of the note is determining on how the note sounds like. So usually we have a release and every note, no matter if it's short or long, has a little, you know, release phase. But here, if we have a really short note, it's really short. And the difference between the short and long notes, and then also the little tiny cut-off automations here, make the sound really interesting and make it even feel like there's two sounds at some points. And this is one pattern, so to say. So you could argue that this is a pattern and it repeats here again. Actually, it doesn't here. I changed it again because I really wanted this one, this higher note, to be some kind of accent that really only happens once in the track. So the listeners will be like, oh, wow, that sounds pretty interesting. It never happened before and it will never happen again. So they had this unique feeling in that moment. So the last part now in the arrangement is to slowly build up and get back into the melodic vibe. So this lead, the lead strong here, shouldn't be up front all the time. So it had his time now, it was on the stage, it was the main character, but now we want to switch this back. So we use this a little weaker pattern here. And it repeats on and on, so it's not as strong as the other patterns where there were more notes and more cutoff automations. And we bring back sounds like this ARP, for example. Chords, as you can see, get louder. And there's also the lead coming back. And again, we use this very nice chord FX here. And at this point, we would bring back all the percussions, as we did here already with the bandpass percussion and the cymbal. We would add the riots, and we would slowly build back into this very melodic feeling. And that's it. That's how we recreated the Afterlife sound here, or at least our own interpretation of it. And now you're free to get the session, use the presets on your own thoughts, and just try where you can go with this. So thanks again for watching, and hopefully see you very soon again.